360 on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Canada and Philippines have signed a landmark status of visiting forces agreement, marking Canada's first such defense pact in the Indo-Pacific. The deal expands Manila's network of security alliances alongside the US, Japan, and Australia. A fire at a local supermarket in Hermosillo, Mexico has killed at least 23 people and injured a dozen during Day of the Dead celebrations, mostly from toxic gas inhalation. President Claudia Sheinbaum has expressed condolences and deployed support teams as investigations continue. Hurricane Melissa has devastated Jamaica's farmlands, killing at least 28 people, sparking fears of food shortages and price hikes until February next year. Agriculture Minister has announced plans for recovery through international aid and imports as farmers face millions in losses. The United States has conducted another strike on allegedly narco-trafficking vessel in the Caribbean on Saturday, killing 3 people, bringing the death toll from over 15 U.S. strikes since September to at least 65 people. As President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown intensifies, in Chicago, locals have mobilized block-by-block to resist ICE operations, using whistles and messaging apps to warn one another as clashes turned tense. U.S. President Donald Trump is set to host his Syrian counterpart Ahmed al-Sharaa at the White House on 10th November tentatively. This will be the first ever visit by a Syrian head of state to Washington after decades of international isolation. Israel is preparing for the possibility that Hamas may return the bodies of several hostages tonight. Though the handover has not yet been confirmed, reports suggest that Hamas has located 3 bodies in eastern Khan Yunis, but there is no official verification yet. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has said that Tehran is rebuilding its nuclear facilities with greater strength. While insisting the country is not seeking a nuclear weapon, Pezeshkian's remarks come during a visit to Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, where he has met with senior officials from the country's nuclear industry. Now we start with U.S. and Caribbean. Russia has sharply condemned the United States for what it calls the excessive use of military force in the Caribbean. The Russian Foreign Ministry says that recent U.S. counter-narcotic strikes violate both international and U.S. domestic law, echoing concerns voiced by the UN Secretary General and other global officials. This comes after the Pentagon confirmed fresh strikes on a suspected drug smuggling boat in the Caribbean Sea, killing all 3 on board. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has described the men as narco-terrorists and vowed to keep targeting such vessels exactly like Al-Qaeda. The latest attack marks at least the 15th since September, with more than 60 people killed in U.S. operations across the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. Moscow, meanwhile, has reaffirmed its support for Venezuela and called for de-escalation, warning that Washington's actions threatened regional peace. Now for this discussion, we welcome Raymond Vickery. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Raymond, for joining us again. Good to see you. Raymond, looking at this, what is Russia's, why is Russia saying this? What is Russia's relationship to Venezuela, and how could Russia's criticism of U.S. counter-narcotics operations, does it influence American foreign policy, or doesn't it make any difference?
Well, thanks very much for having me. Yes, it does make a difference because it shows that peace is indivisible. You can't sanction the lawless conduct of the United States in regard to the Caribbean without thinking that it's going to have ramifications overall. Of course, it's ironic that Russia is chiming in when it has had the worst violation of the United Nations principles about respect for sovereignty and its invasion of Ukraine. Nevertheless, in the United States, there is very, very deep concern about the spreading hostilities from boats supposedly transferring narcotics to an international incident. You know, the Trump administration has moved an aircraft carrier off the coast of Venezuela. An aircraft carrier is not the kind of asset that you use against narcotics smugglers. So something else is in the works, and of course what it is trying to get the dictator in Venezuela, Maduro, to step down. This is a very unfortunate way in which the United States is conducting itself. You can't be both prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner under any civil law, and then the administration, Trump administration, has said, well, this is a military action, but when they are challenged under the War Powers Act, which says you can only have hostilities for 60 days, they say, well, that doesn't apply. So they want it both ways. It's a very lawless approach and very unfortunate for the rule of law and building peace internationally.
And what are domestic political challenges might U.S. leaders face regarding the legality and ethics of repeated strikes in Caribbean?
Well, there's no question that on the Democratic side, led by Senator Mark Warner, who's the ranking member in the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, that there is a deep outcry because decades, indeed centuries of bipartisanship in terms of how you conduct the briefings of the Senate and Congress have been thrown out the window. President Trump has invited a few people that he trusts from the Congress to the White House, but has completely ignored the Democrats. So the Democrats are united, and even now you're starting to see some of the Republicans question this approach, because we've always had a bipartisan approach when it comes to national security, and this is being disregarded. Now, whether it's going to have an impact in terms of elections, we'll find out on Tuesday in Virginia, in New Jersey, in which we have elections. Unfortunately, the message has been muddied somewhat because of local issues in both states. But make no mistake about it, this is a part of the overall concern about the rule of law, the future of democracy in the United States, and I believe it's going to have an electoral impact.
With that, I would like to thank Raymond for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, we stay in U.S. In Chicago, tensions are running high as immigration agents clash with residents who have formed neighborhood zone defenses to block arrests. The confrontations have escalated in recent weeks, with agents deploying tear gas in at least 5 neighborhoods and protesters chasing unmarked cars through the city streets. In the Lakeview district, residents have shouted and banged on cars after agents detained a construction worker across the city. Online networks track ICE and Border Patrol movements in real time, sharing locations and vehicle descriptions with tens of thousands of people. Federal officials say their agents have shown restraint despite what they describe as rioting and physical attacks. But activists accuse the government of turning Chicago into what they call a war zone, demanding an end to what they see as violent and unlawful arrests. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Raymond Vickery. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Raymond, for joining us and staying with us. Now looking at this, should local communities have to or have the right to interfere with or resist federal immigration enforcement operations?
Well, thanks for letting me comment on this. Unfortunately, this use of military force or ICE agents in a widespread sweep against people who are deemed to be immigrants, but in many instances actually sweep up citizens of the United States, is of a part of the disregard of the Trump administration for the rule of law and the customs which have governed in this country for some 250 years. You know, on Friday we had sort of a secular holiday, Halloween here, where children go door to door asking for candy, and the governor of Illinois had asked the Secretary of Homeland Security to have a pause, but there was no pause, and so you had the shooting of tear gas while children are trying to participate in Halloween. This shows the lengths to which this administration is going. And it's not just Chicago. Neighboring Evanston, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago, had the same thing. The mayor asked ICE to get out. And it's of a part of what the Trump administration is trying to do in Los Angeles, in Portland, in Washington, D.C. So it's a very unfortunate situation. And really goes against the civilian, local control of counties, cities, towns, and states, which are a part of our constitutional fabric. This has been thrown aside by President Trump and this administration, and it remains to be seen whether or not this is going to produce the kind of backlash among the electorate which will rein in this lawlessness.
And Raymond, talking about critics, one of the criticisms that we saw today in the news was of former President Barack Obama's. Does Obama's criticism of Trump's lawlessness and recklessness help unify or divide the Democratic Party's message ahead of the elections? What do you think about that?
Well, I think it very much helps to unify. He, as you know, was involved in trying to rally voters in both Virginia and New Jersey, two states which have statewide elections. President Obama is very widely respected in the Democratic Party, regardless of whether you're on the left or right spectrum in the Democratic Party. It'll also have a turnout effect. President Obama has a special relationship, obviously, in regard to African Americans, people of color who have been very prominent in the Democratic Party. So I believe it's going to help, and nobody can accuse Barack Obama of being a wild-eyed bomb thrower. He is, in fact, a constitutional lawyer and has been very methodical in his approach and his citing of both Constitution and laws to show that we have to get back to a rule of law in the United States, and I think it'll have a positive electoral impact.
With that, I would like to thank Raymond Vickery for always joining us and sharing that insight all the way from Washington, D.C. Now we move on and we stay in the region. United States Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is currently in Vietnam, where he has visited the infamous Hua Lo prison. The visit to the prison takes place as the United States is in talks with Vietnam over the supply of military equipment. The prison site holds historical significance as during the Vietnam War, several American soldiers, including the late Senator John McCain, were held there. Hexet's visit marks a gesture of respect for the prisoners of war who served the United States during the Vietnam War. Hexet's visit has occurred as part of an Asia tour aimed at bolstering U.S. alliances and partnerships in the Indo-Pacific region as a counterbalance to China's influence. Now we stay in the region. The Philippines and Canada have signed a new defense pact allowing their armed forces to train on each other's soil, a move aimed at strengthening military cooperation and addressing shared security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. The status of visiting forces agreement marks Canada's first such deal in the region, and it expands Manila's network of security partnerships to 5, amid growing tensions with China in the South China Sea. Philippines Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro Jr. has stated that the agreement emphasizes on both the countries' commitment to preserving a rules-based international order. His Canadian counterpart has reaffirmed Ottawa's support for Manila's position, referencing the 2016 arbitration ruling that invalidated China's expansive maritime claims, a decision Beijing continues to reject. The pact complements the Philippines' long-standing alliance with the United States and aligns with its ongoing efforts to bolster regional defense ties. Now for this discussion, we welcome Alison Mutler. She's a former AP Bureau Chief in Romania, joins us live from Bucharest. Thank you very much, Alison, for joining us again. Good to see you. Alison, looking at this, how could Canada's first defense agreement in the Indo-Pacific influence its border policy and regional engagement with Philippines? And why do you think it's with Philippines?
The Philippines is a very important strategic partner in the Indo-China region. It's a huge country. It's 115 million people. Strategically, it's south of China, not that far. You've got the South China Sea in between. And historically, the Philippines, which is a democracy, not a perfect democracy, a medium-range democracy, but it is a democracy, has had alliances, as you said in your earlier report, with the US, now with Canada, also with Australia. Canada is a member of NATO. Obviously, Philippines isn't, but it has traditionally had alliances with big, strong Western partners, and that is to act as a sort of a buffer to China. I think they're worried about China expansion, China perhaps aggression in the South China Sea and in the general Indo-China region, and therefore to bolster defence, they want to have a defence pact with a strong Western partner. They've had it with the US so far, and now they're widening that and having one with Canada. And that will allow for military training, military presence, possible exercises, and it will just bolster the Philippines' idea of security and bring some know-how that perhaps they don't have, that Canada does have.
And how might this new Philippines-Canada Defense Pact shift the balance of power in South China Sea, if it can or could?
I don't know how much it can shift, but it does make the Philippines, as I said, an important country in terms of where its geographical location is, in terms of its size. It does give more strength to the Philippines, and it brings in a solid Western partner. It brings in Canada, which is a very stable democracy. It has a long history of democracy, of military as well, and it is a member of NATO. So they bring not just Canada's military expertise, but the whole of NATO's know-how as well. So the idea is just to strengthen, I think, Philippines for their strategic defence in that region, and also it does to let China know that the Philippines is not on its own. It does have these strategic Western alliances with the US, which was already known, but now with Canada as well. So it's definitely a signal being sent to China that there is concern about potential Chinese aggression and expansion in that area.
Does it change anything for Philippines, as it already has a strategic alliance with U.S.? How do you think Philippines will balance this new agreement with Canada and then simultaneously the agreement with U.S.?
I mean, the US is a long-standing alliance they have with the Philippines. That's gone back for many, many years. The US at the moment, we know about Donald Trump. He has some concerns about NATO, and their concerns whether the US will remain a reliable member of NATO. With Canada, there's no such problems. Canada is a very stable country, traditionally, historically, always has been. And so I think, I'm not saying they're hedging their bets, but they're giving themselves more security by having a second alliance with a strategic partner. And you will see these are partners which have Pacific coasts. We're not talking about countries like Germany or Italy. We're talking about countries with which they share some geographical, they're not close, but they do share some geographical references, in this case, the Pacific Ocean. So I think it's quite important that it shows that the Philippines is not just going to put all its eggs in one basket with the US. It will continue with the US. I think it hopes to continue with the US. It's very reliant on the US strategic partnership, but it's also moving to Canada as well. And I think Canada is very interested in this as well, because they have an interest in Chinese expansion, potential Chinese aggression. So I think it's a smart move by the Philippines to do this, and I also think it's a smart move by Canada to get involved as well.
Right, and building on that, does this creation of Philippines and Canada's defense treaty and also yesterday there was news of new U.S.-Philippine joint task force in the South China Sea. So does both these signal a shift towards a more confrontational approach to China's maritime claims, or a strategic move to deter the aggression?
I personally would say it would be a strategic move to deter that, but the Chinese might read this completely differently and say that the West is the NATO nations, the US and Canada are getting too involved with the Philippines. But I personally would see it as a strategic move to deter Chinese aggression. But China, as I said, Beijing will probably see it differently, or even if they don't see it differently, they will paint it differently.
And Philippines being an ASEAN member, lastly, how can ASEAN countries balance economic ties with China and then security partnership with the West amid rising tensions in South China Sea?
Yes, it's a tricky act. It's a tricky dance to be doing. But the Philippines, they're adept at this. They are, on the one hand, they have the economic ties, they have tourism with China, they have visits, they have geographical proximity, they have trade. That's normal. But China is not a democracy, and the Philippines is. It's not, as I said earlier, it's not a perfect democracy. They have problems with the rule of law, etc. But the Philippines has opted for democracy, and that puts them in line with the US and Canada and other countries, Australia as well. And therefore, it seems to me that it would be normal that they would seek to make a strategic defense alliance with Western democracies rather than China. China's good for trade, but for defense, strategic defense, they need Western partners.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Alison Mutler for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we move on. Nigeria has said that it would welcome U.S. help against Islamist insurgents, but only if its territorial integrity is respected. The statement came after President Donald Trump warned of possible fast military action over reports of Christian killings in the West African nation. Trump has threatened to cut all U.S. aid to Nigeria and pledged a blazing response against terrorists if the country does not act quickly to protect the Christians. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu has pushed back, insisting his government is working to safeguard religious freedom, while analysts note most victims of the insurgency are actually Muslim. A Nigerian presidency spokesperson has said the dialogue with the U.S. could yield better outcomes in our joint resolve to fight the terrorism. Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has confirmed that preparations for action are underway. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Alison Mutler. She's a former AP Bureau Chief in Romania, joins us live from Bucharest. Thank you very much, Alison, for staying with us. Now looking at this, what are the potential implications of U.S. threats to cut aids in Nigeria, and why is Nigeria particularly talking about its integrity or to protect its sovereignty in their integrity in their soil?
Very volatile situation. Again, we have a huge, rather unstable country in Africa, 200 million people. You have this insurgency which has been going on, I think, since 2009. In the north of Nigeria, you largely have a Muslim population, the south a Christian population. Now, the insurgency is not, from what I've read, has not specially targeted Christians, but it has targeted Christians, and it's also targeted Muslims as well. And I think the US is saying that they want this to stop, and they will prepared for military force. Now, on the one hand, Nigeria would be happy to have the clout, the authority, perhaps some military expertise in the United States, but on the other hand, it would be worried about its territorial sovereignty, which is why that's mentioned in the statement. We welcome the United States, but we need a guarantee for our territorial sovereignty. They don't want the US dividing up their country and trying to make one part Muslim, one part Christian. But they do have this insurgency which has been going on since 2009, so that's about a long time, and a lot of lives. I think it's 40,000 lives have been lost, and that is a big problem for their country and for the development of their country.
And Alison, could there be another motive or interest for U.S. to enter Nigeria other than protecting the Christian citizens of Nigeria?
Yeah, there's quite potential to be geopolitical interest of getting more influence in Africa. We do know that China, which has been working for years to get more influence. There could be economic reasons, resources in Nigeria. So yes, there must be other reasons that aren't being declared, but I do know it might be the US seeking to expand its influence in that continent, in Africa, to counteract China influence, but also for economic reasons to access rich Nigerian resources.
With that, I would like to thank Alison Mutler for joining us and sharing that insight all the way from Romania. Now we move on to our next news. Human Rights Watch has accused police in Rio de Janeiro of failing to take crucial investigation steps after a deadly raid on October 28th that has left at least 121 people dead, including 4 police officers. The large-scale operation has targeted drug traffickers in the city's low-income, predominantly black neighborhoods of Alemão and Penha. According to Human Rights Watch, police failed to preserve crime scenes or conduct proper forensics analysis actions vital to establishing how the victims died. A Rio forensic expert has said no crime scene examinations were carried out, while prosecutors confirmed that evidence collection was incomplete or poorly managed. Residents later found that dozens of bodies in a wooded area where police reportedly cornered suspected gang members. Witnesses said they saw unguarded evidence such as bullet casings and blood stains, which authorities failed to secure. The rights group have also criticized the handling of seized weapons, which were shown to the media without maintaining the proper chain of custody, and noted that body camera footage from the operation may have been lost. Human Rights Watch is urging Brazilian authorities to ensure an independent, transparent investigation into the killings and to separate forensic services from the civil police to prevent conflicts of interest. And that's a wrap on